We've all heard it, the sound that says something's wrong. For many, it's an order to leave immediately, but for the first responder, it's a call to swing into action. A hazardous substance release can be small or large. It can affect a few employees or everyone in the facility, or even the entire community. In a hazardous substance emergency, prompt correct action can save lives and prevent serious injuries and property damage. But knowing what to do takes preparation and training. HAZWOPER stands for Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response. Included in the standard are federal requirements to train personnel who respond to hazardous substance emergencies. The standard requires that employees who take part in emergency response efforts receive special training at one of 5 levels. First responder awareness level employees are those likely to witness or discover a hazardous substance release and then notify proper authorities. First responder operations level employees are those who perform initial on-site response to protect nearby people, property, or the environment from the effects of the release. They try to prevent the release from spreading without actually trying to stop it. Hazardous materials technicians respond aggressively to stop the release of hazardous substances. Hazardous materials specialists have a more detailed knowledge of individual substances and act as the liaison for government authorities regarding on-site activities. The on-scene incident commander assumes control of the emergency. This includes activating the emergency response plan and dealing with issues like protective clothing and decontamination. This program focuses on training for Level 2 personnel, first responders at the operations level. Level 2 responders are trained to contain the release from a safe distance, keep it from spreading, and prevent exposures. They do not actually try to stop the release. In addition to meeting all Level 1 requirements, Level 2 responders must show expertise in 6 additional areas. 1. Hazard and risk assessment. 2. Personal protective equipment. 3. Hazardous materials terms. 4. Basic control, containment, and confinement. 5. Basic decontamination procedures. And 6. Standard operating procedures and termination procedures related to the emergency. Your facility's written emergency response plan deals with many of these items as they relate to your workplace. Be sure to understand and follow plan procedures whenever you respond to an emergency. When you learn of a hazardous substance release, hazard and risk assessment are the steps you take to evaluate the situation. Gather information before you take any action. Some of this information is part of your facility's emergency response plan. It tells you about equipment and other resources. It also explains the operating procedures for dealing with a release. A Level 2 responder must be well-versed in all aspects of the facility's emergency plan in order to respond properly. Your first task is to identify the substance. Often you can simply ask the employees who work in the area. Check to see what process is involved and where the release is located. If you're still unclear, look for placards, labels, and markings on containers and vehicles. Check for shipping papers. Ask bystanders, especially personnel trained as Level 1 responders. They may have already identified the substance and can provide you with valuable assistance. Next, look for clues to help you assess the situation. Try to estimate the amount, concentration, and rate of release. Are there threats to life, such as actual or potential fire or explosion? Are there electrical or confined space hazards? Are there injuries or exposure victims? Is the release escaping into the air or entering a waterway or storm drain? And what about the weather? Is wind or rain or snow going to affect the situation? While you gather this information, always assume the worst. Stay at a safe distance. Don't step in or touch a liquid spill. Stay upwind and uphill from a release. Never go into a vapor cloud, and remind others to do the same. As a Level 2 responder, one of your duties is to protect those who might not recognize the hazards involved. Once you've identified the substance, you'll be able to use several important resources to get more information. First, check the Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS. This tells you the material's properties and hazards, the personal protective equipment you need, how to control spills and fires, and what to do if someone is exposed. Another good reference is the North American Emergency Response Guidebook, the ERG. The guidebook is designed to help emergency personnel evaluate chemical hazards. It describes fire, explosion, and health hazards, and measures to protect public safety. Emergency responders use it to find information about evacuation distances, personal protective gear, first aid, and firefighting techniques. Shipping papers, manufacturer contacts, and other information sources also can help you learn the best way to deal with the problem. Review these information sources regularly, so you'll be able to locate and use them quickly in an emergency. Once you've scoped out the situation, your next job is to decide what you can do to lessen the threat. Protecting people, including yourself, is your first priority. Your facility's emergency response plan spells out the steps to follow in various types of emergencies. A thorough understanding of that plan is the best way to know the right thing to do. Some guidelines apply in almost all emergencies. When you arrive at a scene, look at the area and mentally picture a danger zone. Are there people in the danger zone? Will you need to enter to clear personnel? Rescue someone? Fight a fire? Block the spread of a spill? Before entering the danger zone, determine the risk to your health or safety. Ask yourself if you have the training and equipment needed to do the job. If not, let other responders handle the emergency. If you are qualified to perform a rescue, move the victim as quickly as possible to a safe location outside the danger zone. Be careful not to contaminate yourself. This may require removing some of the victim's clothing or taking other steps to decontaminate the victim before direct contact. Your employer provides PPE that is suitable for the hazardous substances and situations present in your workplace. You also receive training on proper use, care, maintenance, and storage. Level 2 responders will not use every type of PPE, but it's important to know what is available, where it is located, and how to use it. The PPE you will need in an emergency depends on the hazardous chemical present and the possible routes of entry. Inhalation hazards require respiratory protection. Absorption hazards call for protective clothing. Other PPE items include eye protection, such as goggles and face shields, hard hats, and protective gloves and footwear. Different PPE provides different levels of protection. For example, the positive pressure self-contained breathing apparatus, which supplies uncontaminated air, provides the highest level of respiratory protection. Air purifying units, which use cartridges or filters, will protect you in situations where a lower level of respiratory protection is needed. Totally encapsulating chemical suits give the most protection from absorption hazards. Non-encapsulating chemical-resistant clothing, like splash suits and coveralls, offer less protection. Be sure to select the PPE that is right for the job. As a Level 2 responder, learn as much as you can about the substances present in your workplace. When you respond to an emergency, check the MSDS and other information sources to determine what PPE you need. Company policy and the emergency response plan can also help you be prepared. As a Level 2 responder, you can take steps to limit the size and spread of a hazardous materials release, if you can do this without endangering yourself. You should consider the hazards of the substance, the equipment available, and other conditions that affect safety. Be guided by the emergency plan, operating procedures, the MSDS, and other references, and by the instructions from the incident commander. Your first option is to stop the release by closing a cutoff valve outside the hazard area. The emergency plan and your knowledge of the work area can help you know the best place to do this. Sometimes a release can be controlled by righting an overturned container or rotating it so it stops leaking. In some cases, responders will remove the leaking container or seal it into a protective container. Level 2 responders usually won't perform these types of containment because they require you to get close to the release. In many cases, your best action is to keep the situation from getting worse. If the substance is flammable, remove sparks and heat sources by cutting off electrical power and controlling smoking and machinery that could spark. If vapors are present, move yourself and others upwind and as far away as possible. If the release occurred in a confined space, stay out of the area. Only specially trained teams are allowed to enter a confined space to perform a rescue or control a release. If the released substance is a liquid, try blocking the flow so it won't enter waterways, sewers, or storm drains. Cover or close nearby drains and manholes. Dig a pit and create dikes to direct the flow to the pit. Place them at a safe distance from the released substance and use materials that won't react with it. Dikes can also be used indoors. Synthetic absorbents in sock or pillow form are the easiest to use, but any inert, non-combustible substance will work for most spills. Absorbents can also be used to soak up spills for later recovery or disposal. Different absorbents work best for different materials, so be sure to check the MSDS to know what to use. Selecting the proper absorbents is important to prevent fires and other undesirable reactions. Some liquids can be recovered directly. Use special equipment that will not cause a fire or explosion. All materials cleaned up, including absorbents and neutralizing chemicals, must be carefully gathered and disposed of properly. In most cases, these substances are considered hazardous wastes and subject to strict packaging, labeling, and disposal requirements. Decontamination, decon for short, is the removal of hazardous substances from anyone or anything that may be contaminated. The entire release area and all personnel must be deconned. This includes clothing, PPE, tools, and equipment. Anything that cannot be deconned must be discarded, probably as hazardous waste. Your facility's emergency response plan explains various decon procedures, but the methods used are determined at the site. Always know the location of the decon station so you can get to it in a hurry if you have to. There are several basic decon methods. The first and most common is physical removal. This includes rinsing, brushing, wiping, or vacuuming to remove contaminants. Hosing off with water is a type of physical removal. The decon procedure for an incident may require several steps, depending on the chemical and physical properties of the contaminants. For example, decon might consist of simply removing contaminated clothing and washing your hands. Or it might require a series of washes and rinses before the PPE is even removed. Separate clothing and equipment as directed so that it can be deconned properly. Failure to follow decon procedures precisely can expose your co-workers and even your family to later contamination. A Level 2 responder must understand a wide range of safety procedures and recognize many kinds of hazards. Your facility's standard operating procedures and the emergency response plan spell out how to handle various types of emergencies. These documents also lay out responsibilities and tell you who oversees each phase of an emergency. Understanding these procedures and the chain of command at the scene is essential. As a Level 2 responder, you must understand the hazards that may be encountered in your workplace. These may include fire and explosion hazards, confined space hazards, electrical hazards, and equipment, vehicle, and surface hazards. For many of these, your facility has written standard operating procedures, or SOPs, that can help you deal with an emergency. Look to these procedures to locate shutoff valves and escape routes, to find emergency supplies and spill cleanup equipment. The emergency response plan also spells out how the chain of command works during an emergency. In most cases, a single individual, called the incident commander, is in charge. The command system helps produce clear communications and lets everyone at the scene understand his or her responsibilities. During an emergency, the incident commander determines what is needed to handle the emergency and summons various levels of expertise as needed. Many emergency responses also call for the scene to be divided into zones. The hot zone is an area of high risk. The warm zone is an area of lesser risk. And the cold zone is the area where the hazard is lowest and exposure is unlikely. All responders must know the location of each special area and understand and observe the zone system. This means you never enter the site without first reporting in and collecting needed equipment and PPE. When the emergency is over, the incident commander begins the cleanup process. You may help with hazardous substance disposal, decontamination of tools and equipment, or checking the release area for residues and other signs that additional decon is needed. You may also need to complete reports about the incident or provide information about what went well and what went wrong. It's not easy to be a Level 2 responder. You must understand the emergency response plan and your role in it. You must be able to assess the risks and hazards of an emergency. You must understand how to use various kinds of PPE provided to you and know what is required in each situation. You must know basic control, containment, and confinement techniques and decontamination procedures. And finally, you must be familiar with many different SOPs, safety requirements, and company policies. Your skills contribute to making your workplace and the world a better place.